So, if you love classic cars, vintage machines and the stories that drive them, motorheritage.org.au is your hub for preserving Australia's rich motoring past.
Oh, probably the first Porsche I drove in the UK, grabbed for a weekend trip to Yorkshire, starting to get to know the country a bit. I liked 911s a lot, but was always slightly wary. We learned to be wary on wet roads, particularly in the autumn, leaves on a downhill bend, that sort of thing, when suddenly the front would wash out. So
Brakes lock up?
Brakes locked up, yeah. So learned to be wary about that, but always liked them. Characters in the automotive industry, Peter and I have both been privileged to meet. Bob Lutz, everyone know Bob's name. A truly amazing man who had a profound effect on so many companies, not least BMW in the 3 years he was there. I wrote a long piece about him last year, which I spent a month researching and talking at length to Bob, other people he'd worked with, etc. Anyway, while he was at BMW, various things happened. One was he started the motorsport division with some resistance, got that going, and I think where BMW would be now without that and without just the M brand. Also, the chairman at the time, von Kuhnheim, was looking at ditching the BMW Roundel badge as we know it. He wanted to remove the black border with BMW written in it, and Lutz got into a proper shouting match with him about that, and that would be a stupid thing to do. Anyway, it was the end of Bob's career there, really, because von Kuhnheim never forgave him, but the BMW badge stayed as it had always been, and well, not always been, but it kept that key part of its identity. Amazing man, 92 years old. I was talking to him last week about another story I'm doing. You get a response within seconds. You send him an email. He lives in Michigan with his current wife.
What's her name?
Her name's Terry, and he's got a reasonable collection of cars. He did have a collection of jet fighters. He had 3 because before he went into the automotive industry, he was a US Marines fighter pilot based in Okinawa through the 50s, and he liked to keep his hand in. But he said, I said, how many planes have you got left, Bob? And he said, I got rid of the last jet a few years ago when I was 86. He said, I decided I really shouldn't be doing that anymore. But a wonderful, generous man at Ford. So after BMW, he went from GM to BMW. After BMW, he went to Ford, was very rapidly made president of Ford of Europe. Kicked off a better way of making Fords in Europe, and was the instigator of Ford special vehicles. So all those RS cars that came out of Dunton in the UK, that was really triggered by Bob. After that, his time of great note was at Chrysler, where he was part of the crew with Lee Iacocca, who rejuvenated Chrysler in the biggest possible way, and he personally was responsible for the Viper. Peter knows all about Viper.
Yes, he had a Cobra. Bob had a Cobra, and he was out driving it one day, and he thought, we should be doing a car like this. And he realised that they were developing a V10 for a truck. So he thought, well, we can put the V10 into a Viper-like vehicle, and that was what happened. Chrysler at the time was living on K-cars, which were a people mover, and some small sedans, which were old and boring. And the Viper got Car Magazine covers for about 3 years because they showed it, I think, at the 1990 Detroit show. 89, 1990, can't remember. But it took 3 years to get into production, but it was the hype built around the Viper that kept the place going, kept the dealers alive. Not because they were selling a lot of cars, they weren't, because the Viper took that long to get into production, but it just encouraged the dealers to show them that there was a positive future.
And Bob, of course, is the reason General Motors has an Australian design director now, Vice President of Design, Mike Simcoe.
Yeah.
Because Bob used to come to Australia and saw how good Simcoe was, and then led to his move to the US. But also, Bob realised that the Australian Monaro that Mike had designed could have another life as a reborn Pontiac GTO.
Yes, it was Bob who insisted it be a Pontiac, but subsequently they realised it should never have been a Pontiac, it should have been a Chevrolet. But the Chevrolet dealers had so many models at the time that they weren't interested in having another car. But it worked reasonably well as a Pontiac. It would have been much better as a Chevy.
Did Lutz help save Lamborghini as well? When Chrysler took over Lamborghini?
No, I think that he wasn't there then, was he?
He was for a time when they owned Lamborghini, but not a long time. I'll have to think.
I think he came later. It was Iacocca, early Iacocca, I think. Anyway,
It was Iacocca who bought the Lamborghini.
Yeah.
Bob wasn't involved in the decision to buy them.
No.
Oh, we should just go back to Bob, because he had retired and he was running a battery company, I think, when he had lunch with Rick Wagner, who was the boss of General Motors. And Rick had sought Bob out because he wanted to find someone who could be a product guy, a car guy as the Americans call it. And they had lunch together, and Rick spelled out what he wanted this bloke to do, and it was effectively to be the product boss for General Motors globally. And finally Bob realised that he was the bloke for the job. And so at the age of 73, I think he came out of retirement and accepted this number 2 position at General Motors, and he did make a difference. I can remember going to the proving ground in 1985, and it had a 55 mile an hour speed limit. You were not allowed to drive over 55 miles an hour. And we were not aware of this, the group of Australian journalists, so we started to do that. And any time anyone did it, a security guy would come up in one of the security vehicles and tell you, if you do that again, you're going to be thrown off the place. So we had to adhere to the 55 mile an hour rule, which led us to understand why General Motors cars at that time were such rubbish. Lutz then insisted that there be a handling track built at the proving ground, which was then called the Lutz Ring, and it's a mini Nürburgring, and there is no longer a 55 mile an hour speed limit. So his influence across car companies is enormous.
Just finally, the other little thing he did at BMW was to insist that they retain the dual kidney grille. That was on its way out too. They were just going to go to a bland grille, and that was another shouting match that wasn't long before Bob left. But can you imagine BMW without the badge, without the distinctive grille, without M Sport?
Having said all of that...
And the naming system, the 357.
Oh, right,
the Herbert Quant, whose family owned BMW and still do own a large percentage of it, he was looking for a new naming system, and they were really struggling with it. He had a favoured one that was very complicated. It caused an issue when you had a car that was a 1600, but it was going to be fitted with a 2-litre engine. So it'd be a 1600 2.0, so all that kind of complexity. Anyway, one of the sales guys came up with the 357 system, and Lutz saw it immediately that this was a flash of brilliance, that you could then go 316, 320, etc., 525, and he got into a big battle with the chairman who owned the company, sorry, not von Kuhnheim, but Mr. Quant, who owned the company. And he prevailed, but at the end of it, Quant said to him, Mr. Lutz, Herr Lutz, I appreciate your wisdom and your intensity and your commitment, but do not ever go head-to-head with me again. So, anyway, so BMW owned Bob Lutz a lot.
I think we have to recognise that von Kuhnheim was a difficult man, but he was also a genius, and it was he who made BMW what it is. Not today, but until he retired, which would be in the mid-1990s.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely true, yeah. So, to Japanese gentlemen, of course, Satoru Honda, as you can see, this is at a Tokyo Motor Show, very casually dressed. He was a person not concerned at all about airs and graces, frills, just the purity which was so reflected in Honda's activities and cars. The guy on the right is Shotaro Kobayashi, who was a great friend of Peter's as well. Yeah. He was editor of the Japanese Car Graphic magazine, which he patterned initially on Autocar because as a young man he started to read the English magazine Autocar. Anyway, both of us became great friends of his. He was a proper gentleman, wasn't he? I didn't know this, but you'd go places where Shotaro and people would be bowing very deeply. It was only later I discovered that he was from a very notable old family of warriors. Yeah. Yes, but all that respect was still there, but partly also because of his standing as a magazine editor and publisher within the motor industry.
He came to Europe with his wife with a Honda S600. Does anyone remember the S600? And they spent months driving around Europe in the little S600, visiting car factories and writing stories and so on.
He had an Austin 7 in the garage underneath his house in Tokyo. That's a rather good driver called Hannu Mikkola, and me there about to be taken on an extraordinary drive through a Welsh forest while they were prepping the car for the RAC rally. That would have been in 1980, late 85. Because my daughter was born in January 86, and as a soon-to-be father, this was large in my mind as we dodged trees and things. But the thing and what they were doing at that time with the S1 Quattro was evaluating different diffs. They were having particular issues with the centre diff, and they were trying Torsen diffs and other diffs. So they were down to the last fractions of seconds to discern the difference between the diffs on this gravel course through a Welsh forest. But halfway around the circuit, I suppose it was about 5 miles long, this track was cut across the side of a mountain, so there was the hillside, drop, bank, road, another bank going down. It's in the pine forest, and some of the trees had fallen down. There was one part of the track where a tree had fallen from the upper bank down onto the lower bank, but its trunk was sticking up partly above the track. And as we approached this at something over 100 miles an hour, the tip of this tree trunk was about level with my head on the windscreen there. So I started to duck, and the first time we went round, I thought, we're going to hit this tree, it's going to take the top off the car. Well, just before there, Hannah would just flick the car sideways, so we would go under this tree trunk, and it would pass above the bonnet, and on the other side, you just straighten up and carry on. That, for me, was the greatest piece of driving that I've personally experienced from the passenger seat. But the cold, cool, calm, collected thing, but along with the intense concentration of trying to discern the difference between the diffs and to give them the last bit of performance. Very nice man, by the way. Okay, I talked earlier about David E. Davis. I don't know how many people recognise these guys, but that's David E. Davis Jr., editor of Car and Driver, and later founder and editor of Automobile, and that's P.J. O'Rourke, the famous American satirist, and another Car and Driver staple, Brock Yates. And that guy on the left in the Land Rover outfit is a guy called Roger Craythorne, who was known as Mr. Land Rover. He'd been involved with the development of Land Rovers around the world for decades. Another lovely bloke. We were on a jaunt from the bottom to the top of Wales. I'd had an idea for a quite substantial off-road test, Land Rover, Range Rover, Mercedes G-Wagon, something else. And I phoned David and said, look, I'm going to do this trip up through Wales. Well, Davis, hello, Welsh, didn't resist any excuse to come to Wales. So David said, right, you do the European British cars, I'll bring the Yanks. So David arranged 4 American off-roaders to be flown over. He had such influences, the editor of Car and Driver, that they would do that. So he arrived with his 4, with a Jeep and a Bronco and a Chevy Blazer and something else. So off we went on this route up through Wales, and David had the wisdom to ask P.J. O'Rourke, a very funny writer, to write the story. So that's why we're all standing there having a break above a dam in Wales. All probably good blokes. David E. Davis Jr. was a very larger-than-life character, once described by Time magazine as Hemingway on wheels. Was a very adventurous man, but also a stickler for certain things, not least his name, which was always spent David E. full stop, Davis, comma, Jr. full stop. And I asked him to write a story for me for Car magazine once, and I bylined it David E. without the full stop, Davis, and dropped the Jr. because that's just an American thing that we don't particularly care for. Well, a few days later, I got a letter saying, my father, to whom you referred, is David E. Davis, and I, sir, am David E. Davis Jr. I never forgot.
And if you called him Dave, I think that was equally as bad.
Yeah.
He just would not respond.
No. God, I should... He mentored a lot of people, not least a girl called Jean Lindemood, who subsequently Jean Jennings. They were great pals for a couple of decades and were editor and deputy editor at Automobile magazine. But she and he fell out and David left. You know about this more than I do, don't you? That Jean wanted to get rid of him. He was, I think, 75, something like that. And she felt it was time for her to have a go as the editor. And so she machined a coup, and David never forgave her. And thus, when someone asked him on a podcast his view of Jean Jennings and had he ever forgiven her, he said something like, well, he said, I lie awake at night and I dream of a FedEx plane on its way to Memphis and a huge black grand piano somehow slides out of the FedEx plane and it falls down on Jean's house in Michigan, and in the morning all they find is a grease spot where Jean Lindemood used to be. So, yeah, great man to have on side, but you really didn't want to be on his wrong side. But we had some fantastic road trips together. He knew how to live. McLaren F1. The small picture of the silver car. Oh, sorry, that's coming up. We'll get to that. Okay. wow, what an impact that car had. We knew it was coming, and in fact I'd worked extremely hard for more than 18 months with Ron Dennis at McLaren to convince him that the absolute first story on the F1 should be done by Autocar magazine, where I then was, and Peter. And in the end, I persuaded him that they should only let one publication test it, but that we at Autocar had connections around the world, and we would do the photographs and the story and pass it on to the other key publications around the world. And Ron rather liked that idea because it meant he only had to give the car out once, and he would cover basically all the world's media. So that's how Autocar got the first crack at it, and the only set of figures that were ever run.
Unfortunately, Mel, I have to contradict you.
Okay.
Car Graphic magazine in Japan were able to borrow a car and to run their own performance figures on it. It's something which is perpetuated in Autocar, and I keep shouting at Autocar about it, and at Andrew Frankel, who ran the Autocar figures, who insists that there were only ever one set of figures. There were two sets of figures.
Thank you, Peter. I didn't. Sorry, I should have known. Anyway, shall I tell the story in Yorkshire when you and I were passengers?
Oh my God, yes. Okay.
So the car has taken off to Bruntingthorpe, an old airfield in the UK, to have its performance figures run, and which absolutely staggered those who were doing it. And it was driven the next day up to Yorkshire, where various others who wanted to drive it and experience it were waiting.
Which was everybody.
Yeah. Some of us had a bit of seniority, so we were there. Anyway, at one stage, Peter and I were passengering either side of a young Autocar road tester, and we were bowling along at some fair speed.
This is on a two-lane road in Yorkshire, so it's not smooth and it's windy.
Even now, I'd hesitate to say just how fast we were going, but as the clock went past 200 miles an hour at one point, Peter and I looked at each other across the back of this driver and thought, it's probably enough. And I said to the driver...
No, we got to 215 before you said it, and we were in a competition to see who would be the first to yes, and it was Mel.
Yeah, and I think I just said quite quietly, that's probably enough, mate.
Dimes. If he was 25, I'd be surprised. And he was called Dimes. Everyone at Autocar had a nickname, and this bloke's name, James?
Yeah, James, yeah.
Yeah, but his name was Dimes.
Yeah.
I think that's enough, Dimes.
Yeah. He had no idea, of course, how fast he was going, because you just don't have time to look at the clock. So, but that car was remarkable. In all
Yes, it was, but the brakes were a little suspect if you really tried, and very heavy, and the steering loaded up a little bit.
It did, yeah.
But it wouldn't stop me from wanting one. They look so bloody wonderful.
They do. Peter Stevens, who designed it, we know well, and also the man in the next picture. Well, not in the picture. So that's our old friend and colleague Steve Cropley with Peter and myself. But the picture is taken by Gordon Murray, who of course created the McLaren F1. And Peter says that Gordon was taking the pictures to send to his mum.
Yeah, Gordon is South African, and he wanted his mum to see what he'd done. So at the end of the roll, it was a roll of 36 shots, he said, well, I'll take one of you blokes, so that's it. Now, of course, he's got some, what's it called, the Gordon Murray T50?
Yeah.
Which a V12 engine that revs to 12,000 revs, 11 and a half, normally aspirated, manual gearbox, under 1,000 kilograms, I think.
So we're all rather proud of having our pictures taken by Gordon Murray.
We are.
Yeah. BMW M1. You all probably know about that car, so let me tell you about what was to be a new BMW M1 that should have arrived this year, but as was axed from going into production in favour of yet another SUV, big electric SUV. But BMW, almost every year, the design department keep coming up with sketches and proposals for a new M1. It does mean so much to them, that car, and as the first proper M car. And 4 years ago, the current design team did come up with a wonderful looking car, and BMW had to fight their emotions to not make it, but they could see that making an SUV would sell a lot more vehicles at a lot higher profit than another two-seat mid-engined, albeit hybrid.
I think you should explain how you know that.
I know that because another one of those happenstance things. I was at home one day, phone call from a bloke in Manhattan called Steve Saxty, a Brit. I'd met many years ago when he was sales director of Porsche in the UK. He rang me and said, look, I want to write a book. I'm taking a year off to write a book. I've always wanted to do about the fast European Fords. I need an editor. Could you recommend someone? And I went, well, you know what, I'd rather like that. So I ended up editing this series of Ford books for Steve. He was a design engineer at Ford before he went down a marketing route. He was at Mazda at the time of the MX-5, and then various other companies, Nissan, Jaguar, and he ended up being the automotive brand director at one of the world's big brand consultancies called Future Brand. Anyway, he took a year out to do this book. Well, the books were seriously good because Ford opened their archives to him. They'd never done this before with the European archives in Cologne, and so they gave Steve carte blanche to go in and find what he wanted to find. So he ended up with 3 books because there was simply too much to go in one. The later 2 were called Secret Fords, Volumes 1 and 2. All of these cars had never been seen before. They were design proposals, prototypes, that sort of thing, that generally never made it, or they were design studies backwards for production models that did. The upshot of all this is that Adrian von Hooydonk, the design director of BMW, the group that is Mini, Rolls-Royce, etc., as well as BMW, saw these books, thought they were really rather good, got on to an old mate of his, who was another Dutchman, and who was the design director at Porsche, and said, look, do you know this guy Steve Saxty? And it's gone out of my head. Harm Legay. Harm said, yes, I do. And Adrian von Hooydonk said, can you let Steve Saxty know that if he'd like to do books like this about BMW, I will open our archives to him. So Steve got in touch and the doors opened, and he's spent just over 2 years inside BMW, on and off inside BMW, gathering all this material. He's now produced a series of books about the whole design heritage of BMW. One of the chapters in the main book is about the car that succeeded this and would have been called M1 2024.
Just a word about the M1. It's one of the best cars I've ever driven. Not only is it a beautiful Giugiaro body, but it is a supercar that is, like some of the cars you've talked about, manageable, easy to drive.
Not bad vision.
Not bad vision, no. But just quick enough. Cars that are too quick, I just don't like driving on the road. But that car, you can extend, you can enjoy, and it's a thrilling car to drive.
I agree.
Much underrated.
Yeah. Part of its story was that BMW didn't have the capacity to completely engineer it themselves, so body designed by Giugiaro. They were having the development work done at Lamborghini and by Lamborghini. until Lamborghini unfortunately went broke, and so then they had to scurry around, and BMW had to scurry around and find someone else to finish the job, and it ended up going back to Ital Design, who finished the job with all the engine drivetrain done at BMW. But torturous birth, but the result was extremely good. That's my car, a 2000 GTV I had and loved, a very good one. I'd had a drive one weekend in Sydney, up the coast. I went up to beyond Port Macquarie, and I took a girl I was hoping to impress, had a very lovely weekend, great drive back, and the drive was so good I dropped her off and turned around and went back again. And just then I got back about 2 in the morning. It was absolutely fantastic. I loved them. So when I could, I bought one of my own, and I had it as long as I had a garage, but then we moved house and I thought I couldn't keep it on the street, so stupidly I sold it.
When was that? When did you?
Oh, about 1990 I sold it, I think, yeah. Another one of those opportunistic pictures from a photographer with a good eye. This is in Scotland, Loch Long, I think. Just, lovely still picture. I had also great respect for the Lotus Esprit Turbo. Light, quite powerful, lag, but not terrible, but good ride and good handling. So I had some great drives in those too. Did you drive those much, Peter?
Only just briefly in Australia. Had a day with one.
Yeah, another lovely Giugiaro body. So I'm driving, Peter's in the passenger seat at that time, and we are there courtesy of Mercedes-Benz Museum in the Mille Miglia retrospective, somewhere in Italy at the time. We had a wonderful couple of days, didn't we, Peter, driving that? But the thing is, we were in the same Mercedes factory team with a certain guy called Sterling Moss, who was in a car number 722, and the highlight of our days would be, because we left before Sterling did, was waiting until Sterling came up behind us and then would go past, usually with a flourish.
Did we try and stay with him? You couldn't.
Wasn't going to happen.
No.
Yeah.
And we also discovered that I'd been told that with the swing axle rear suspension, these cars were difficult to drive, but we had no issues with it at all. So whether it had been tweaked or not, I don't know.
We've gone back to Sicily here, and that if you up there where that rock is, just between the two signs, the bank above that, which is now covered by foliage, was empty, and that was where I sat and took that picture we saw earlier of the RSR in the 73 Targa. And this picture eventuated because Peter had Sicilian involvement as well when he decided to do a story with Nino Vaccarella.
Yes, well, Autocar had said to us, we want you to do your dream story. This was in 1992. And my dream was to go to Sicily and drive the Targa Florio. And then I thought, well, what we should do is do it with Nino Vaccarella, who had won the race 3 times. He was a professor, had a business school in Palermo. We got in touch with Nino, who could not have been more charming. And so we took an Alfa S Il Mostro down to Sicily, and we did a day of driving around the circuit with Nino. And then the following day with Stan Papior, Autocar's photographer, he and I did it again for the photography. And we stopped at this corner, and on the inside of the corner, so over there,
Yeah, the corner goes like that.
Yes. We were looking for somewhere to shoot from up high, and we got talking to the fellow who ran the garage, which is that garage, and he lives in the apartment above it. And it was he who rescued Nino when Nino Vaccarella crashed the Ferrari. He was coming down into Colassano and he was waving to the crowd, and he got on some loose gravel and it crashed, and he was devastated, of course. But the car was then taken, and Arcadio, I think his name was, he had put the car in the garage to rescue it from the Sicilians, because there were hundreds of them. And 20 years later, we went back again.
Yeah, we decided to go back for, both of us to go back to Sicily. And so we thought we'd like to take a Cayman S, which had just been launched. And so Peter and I met in Rome, and the car was brought down to Rome for us. That car, apart from about to bolt from Rome to Sicily, had been 2 days before on the launch program in Portugal, and in order to get it back, prep it and down to Italy for us, a Porsche guy drove it through the night back to Stuttgart, and then a German couple called Hans and Gita. Hans had been a Luftwaffe radar operator, and when he retired in Stuttgart, he thought it might be nice to get a job working for Porsche, delivering cars all over Europe. So Porsche, the car arrived back on the, what day did we go, Saturday or Friday? Anyway, the car arrived back maybe Thursday morning, was fettled at Porsche. Late in the day, they handed it over to Hans and his wife Gita to bring through the night down to Rome to be ready for us at 7 o'clock in the morning. So we walked out of our hotel at 7 o'clock in the morning. Just as they arrived, they took their stuff out, we put our stuff in, and off we went for the 1,500 k's down to Sicily. So we then did a story around the Targa Florio course, and then we drove back, and Hans and Gita appeared on time. She now, with a large number of boxes, this is her first trip to Rome, and she's been buying shoes. So the Cayman went back to Stuttgart full of boxes of shoes. But that weekend, that car did a lot of miles. I absolutely love those Caymans. So sweet. Yeah. Do you remember that when we were coming, we're about halfway up the length of Italy, and we're on that particularly fast bit, and you were comparing it with the feel of a 911 of the time, and you thought it was just a bit more stable, and the steering was more consistent.
Well, the 911 went to a variable ratio steering, and around the straight ahead it didn't have the immediacy of the 996. It was at the time that 997 had just come out. The 996, I will swear until I die, had better steering at the straight ahead and just off 10 degrees either way than the subsequent cars. Oh, and this, I'm sorry, go on.
No,
well, this is the pit. What was the pits for the Targa Florio? They still have historic rallies there.
And Alfa Romeo had paid for, if you look down the back there, you can see the murals in the background. Alfa Romeo had kindly paid for the murals to be done there, generously overlooking the fact that Porsche won far and away the largest number of Targas.
But if any of you want a motoring adventure, I implore you to go to Sicily and drive the Targa Florio course. You will not believe that people could have raced in seriously quick sports cars on that circuit, but you must do it. And there are 3 museums around the circuit.
Yeah.
And so you need a couple of days to do it justice.
While I was there in '73, I jumped in with Brian Redman in that Dino 246 they were using as a hack just to reconnoitre the circuit. And we're going around Brian's full flow, and he said, "Oh, I think I've got this circuit worked out now." And he says, "Oh, fuck!" Suddenly the corner goes the other way. Serious sorting out. He said, "I hate this circuit."
Tune in next week to Curious Jag for part 4, the last thrilling episode diving deeper into Mel Nichols' incredible driving life.